THELASTLIGHTUFSILVERCRENIK. In the quiet mountains of Montana, where the pine trees stretched endlessly toward the cold blue sky and the wind whispered through the valleys like an old forgotten song, there was a small town called Silver Creek, a place so peaceful that most people outside the state had never even heard its name. But behind its peaceful appearance, the town carried a secret that had been buried for nearly 70 years. Every evening, just before the sun disappeared behind the mountains, a single golden light appeared in the window of an abandoned house at the edge of town. No one knew who turned it on. The house had been empty for decades, and the electricity had been disconnected long ago. Yet every night, at exactly সন্ধ্যা 7:17, the light appeared. The older people in Silver Creek refused to talk about it, while the younger generation treated it as nothing more than an old ghost story. But 27-year-old Ethan Walker had never believed in ghosts. Ethan had grown up in Silver Creek, but after his mother died, he left town and moved to Chicago, promising himself that he would never return. For 8 years, he lived in the city, built a successful career, and tried to forget the small mountain town where his childhood had ended. Then, one cold November morning, Ethan received a phone call that changed everything. His father, Daniel Walker, had passed away unexpectedly. Ethan returned to Silver Creek for the funeral, and as he stood beside his father, his bride under a grey November sky, he noticed something strange. His father, a small pocket watch, which Ethan had never seen before, had been placed inside the coffin. After the funeral, Ethan returned to his childhood home and began going through his father's belongings. The house smelled exactly as he remembered: old wood, coffee, and the faint scent of his mother's perfume. While searching through a desk in the basement, Ethan discovered a small wooden box hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers. Inside the box was a photograph of a young woman standing beside the abandoned house at the edge of town. Ethan immediately recognized the house, but the woman was a mystery. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 4 words: "She waited for him." Beneath the photograph was a handwritten letter addressed to Ethan. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Son, if you rereading this, then I am gone. There is something I should have told you a long time ago. The light in the old house is not a ghost story. Your grandfather knew the truth, and I have spent my entire life trying to protect it. Go to the house at exactly সন্ধ্যা 7:17. Take the pocket watch with you. When the light appears, you will understand." Ethan read the letter 3 times. His first thought was that his father had lost his mind. But something about the words made him uneasy. That evening, Ethan drove toward the old house. Snow had begun falling softly, covering the road in white. As he parked his truck near the edge of the forest, he looked at his father's pocket watch. The hands showed সন্ধ্যা 7:16. 1 minute later, the window of the abandoned house suddenly glowed with a warm golden light. Ethan stepped out of the truck. The forest was completely silent. He walked toward the house, holding the pocket watch tightly in his hand. When he reached the front door, he discovered that it was unlocked. Inside, the house was covered in dust, but strangely, there were fresh footprints on the wooden floor. Ethan followed them down a narrow hallway until he reached a small room at the back of the house. There, sitting on a wooden table, was an old lantern. The flame inside it was burning brightly. Ethan stared at the lantern in disbelief. Then he heard a voice behind him. "You finally came." Ethan turned around. An elderly woman stood in the doorway. She was wearing a long grey coat, and her face was familiar in a way Ethan could not explain. "Who are you?" he asked. The woman looked at the pocket watch in his hand and whispered, "Your grandfather promised he would return." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "My grandfather died 30 years ago." The woman smiled sadly. I know. She walked toward the table and touched the lantern. My name is Clara Bennett. 70 years ago, I lived in this house with my family. Your grandfather, Thomas Walker, was my best friend. We grew up together. We planned to leave Silver Creek and build a new life somewhere far away. But one winter night, Thomas disappeared. Ethan listened carefully as Clara continued. The town believed he ran away, but I knew he had not. Thomas had discovered something beneath the mountains, something that powerful men wanted to keep hidden. He found an old mine filled with gold, but it was not the gold that frightened him. Inside the mine, he found evidence that a group of wealthy businessmen had been illegally mining the land and poisoning the river. They were destroying the town, its water supply, and Thomas planned to expose them. Ethan looked at the old photograph. What happened to him? Clara's eyes filled with tears. He never came back. She opened a drawer and pulled out a faded map. But before he disappeared, Thomas gave me this. He told me that if anything happened to him, I should wait for him here. Every evening at সকাল 7:17 I turned on this lantern, hoping that one day he would return. Ethan stared at her. You've been waiting for 70 years. Clara nodded. At first, I waited because I loved him. Later, I waited because I knew the truth had to be found. Ethan looked at the map. A red circle marked a location deep in the mountains. Why did my father send me here? Clara looked directly into his eyes. Because your father was the last person who knew where Thomas hid the evidence. Suddenly, a loud sound came from outside. Ethan and Clara froze. Someone was walking through the snow toward the house. Clara quickly blew out the lantern. We have to go, she whispered. They stepped through a back door and hid inside an old storage room behind the house. Through a small crack in the wooden wall, Ethan saw two men searching the property with flashlights. One of them held a photograph of Ethan's father. Ethan's heart began pounding. Who are they? He whispered. Clara shook her head. The same people who have been protecting this secret for 70 years. After the men left, Clara led Ethan into the forest. They walked for nearly an hour until they reached the entrance of an abandoned mine hidden behind a waterfall. Ethan opened the pocket watch. On the inside cover, he found a tiny engraving he had never noticed before. Follow the light. Clara pointed toward the mine. Inside, they discovered an old wooden tunnel that led deep beneath the mountain. At the end of the tunnel was a small metal box. Ethan opened it and found dozens of photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. The evidence proved everything Clara had said. But there was one final document, a letter written by Thomas Walker himself. Ethan read it aloud. If you are reading this, then I am gone. I have hidden the truth where no one will think to look. The people who destroyed our town may have power, but they cannot control the truth forever. Clara, I am sorry I could not return. If I never make it home, please keep the light burning. One day, someone from my family will come looking. Ethan stopped reading. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time, he understood why his father had kept the secret. His father had spent his entire life protecting the evidence, waiting for the right person to reveal it. But before Ethan could say anything, they heard footsteps approaching inside the mine. The two men had followed them. Clara grabbed Ethan's arm. Run! They raced through the tunnels as the men shouted behind them. Ethan and Clara finally reached a narrow opening overlooking the river. There was nowhere else to go. Ethan looked down at the rushing water below. Then he noticed an old wooden bridge stretching across the river. They ran across it just as the men reached the entrance. One of the men shouted, You don't know what you're doing. Ethan turned around and yelled, Maybe not, but the truth belongs to everyone. The bridge suddenly collapsed behind them, separating Ethan and Clara from the men. They stepped into the forest and returned to Silver Creek before sunrise. The next morning, Ethan contacted a journalist in Helena and gave her copies of the evidence. Within weeks, this story became national news. The investigation uncovered decades of corruption, illegal mining, and environmental destruction. The people responsible were finally arrested, and the river that had once been poisoned began to recover. But there was still one mystery Ethan could not solve. What had happened to his grandfather? Monty H's letter. While clearing his father's house, Ethan discovered another letter hidden inside the wall. This letter was from Thomas to his son, Ethan's father. It explained that Thomas had survived the attack at the mine but had been forced to disappear to protect his family. He had lived under another name in a small town hundreds of miles away, watching from a distance at his family group. He had never returned BCI. He knew the people responsible were still searching for him. At the bottom of the letter, Thomas had written one final sentence: "I never stopped loving you. I simply loved you enough to stay away." Ethan sat alone in the quiet house, holding the letter against his chest. For the first time, he realized that his family's silence had never been about fear alone. It had been about love, sacrifice, and the desperate hope that one day someone would be brave enough to finish what they had started. A year later, Ethan decided not to return to Chicago. He stayed in Silver Creek and helped rebuild the town. The abandoned house at the edge of the forest was restored, and the old lantern was placed in the window once again. Every evening at exactly সন্ধ্যা 7:17, Ethan turned it on. People began visiting the house from all over America. Not BCI they believed in ghosts, but BCI they wanted to remember the story of two people who had waited a lifetime for the truth to come home. And on one quiet winter evening, as snow covered the mountains and the golden light shone through the window, Ethan noticed something strange. The old pocket watch in his hand had stopped ticking. The time was exactly সন্ধ্যা 7:17. Then, from somewhere deep inside the house, Ethan heard the soft sound of footsteps. He turned around, but no one was there. On the wooden table beside the lantern was a small envelope that Ethan had never seen before. His name was written across it in handwriting he immediately recognized. It was his grandfather's handwriting. Ethan opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph of a young Thomas and Clara standing beside the house, smiling at the camera. On the back were 6 simple words: "Thank you for bringing us home." Ethan looked toward the glowing lantern, and for a moment, he thought he saw two figures standing together in the reflection of the window, a young man and a young woman, exactly as they had appeared 70 years earlier. Then the reflection disappeared, and the house became silent again. Ethan smiled through his tears and whispered, "You're home now." From that night forward, the people of Silver Creek told a different story about the light in the old house. They no longer called it a ghost light. They called it the last light of Silver Creek, a light that reminded everyone that no matter how long the truth is buried, no matter how deep the darkness becomes, there will always be